Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the Ethicsverse. Happy Ethicsverse Day. Today we have a phenomenal episode for you about activating middle managers with the one and only Erica Salmon-Byrne. How's it going, Erica? Welcome.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here. Happy belated Global Ethics Day.
All right. So as always, we want to break our record for interactions. This time we had one of our highest ever last time. So I still haven't eaten lunch. I feed off emojis, as you know. So does Erica. So keep those coming as you hear smart things and so forth. That really helps us figure out what the best clips are to share on our page. A couple of quick announcements. Here's our link tree. So hit this QR code and you can go ahead and subscribe to Ethico wherever we are. So you can check out our YouTube channel where we have all the replays of the Ethicsverse and the ethics experts. We had one of our best episodes of the year with Erica a couple of weeks ago, so check that out there. You also can follow us on LinkedIn and follow me on LinkedIn. So there's a bunch of great links there, even one to our benchmark report. So if you're interested in that, go ahead and click that. Today's prize is Mary Shirley's book. We're going to be giving away some books today. So if you haven't bought this yet, then participate in our contest and you're going to get a book today. So this is Living Your Best Compliance Life, 65 hacks and cheat codes to level up your compliance program. This is one of these books that you can literally open up to any page and get a great idea of something actionable that you can put into practice for your program. So we're giving out 5 of those today, but listen to this, we got a little bonus. So if you go to the bottom of your screen right now, there's a little button. And if you reshare the post and you put hashtag Ethicsverse on there, we're going to be choosing 5 winners from that. We're really trying to grow this community. I was just reminded of how special this community was at a WAD Capital Compliance Symposium. And there was so much sharing of great ideas. It was like a really safe space for ethics and compliance folks to share what they're struggling with. And I've just reminded how special our industry is. So we want to grow the Ethicsverse community. So if you reshare that that post for next week's episode, you will be entered in to win one of the 5, be one of the 5 winners. And then separately on the bottom right of your screen, you should see a little like a paper airplane. And if you click that, you can invite 5 friends. So anybody who invites 5 friends will also win a book. Invite 5 of your friends. And if you don't have friends, then just reshare the post and hopefully you can meet someone today. Speaking of which, put your LinkedIn into the chat and let us know where you're coming from as we go through the rest of our announcements here. We have custom benchmark reports. So if you're interested in that and you haven't gotten one yet, go ahead and drop a 1 into the chat. Someone from our team will reach out. We'll take some of your data. We'll put it into a report measuring against our benchmark, the status quo benchmark, and give you a bunch of tips on how you can improve your program. So check that out. If you're interested, Compliance Week is right around the corner. So if you have not yet downloaded our Compliance Week toolkit, I don't know what you're waiting for, but there's a bunch of plug and play things you can do for every single day. The whole point with Compliance Week is you got to just do something. It's a great way to raise awareness for your program, gain some more participation from the human beings in your organization so you can start crowdsourcing risk intelligence at scale. You need that participation. You need that you need to activate that influence, and Compliance Week is a great way to kick that off. So if you don't have anything planned, we got your back. Go ahead and check out our Compliance Week Toolkit, Ultimate Guide. If nothing else, do the Misconduct Mystery Game. We have a video that explains that game on the page. Definitely check that out. It's a fun thing to illustrate some of the challenges that come along with doing an investigation and help to underscore some of the things that are going to be top of mind for you, whether those are conflicts of interest, whether it's just speaking up, whether it is bribes, whatever. So check that out. Ecosystem is our integrated risk management platform. It's getting very popular. Listen to this story. This is crazy. So we had a demo last week. This guy was just blown away by it. His wife apparently works at the zoo, and he called us back a couple of days later and told us that they're naming the next new panda after Ethico because she's not even in the industry and she loved our tool that much. So if you're interested in that, click our website, let us know, and we will give you a leave your wallet at home demo so you can see how integrating your tool to save you some work can help you focus on the things that only you can do. A couple of other books that have hit our bookshelves that we want to share. This is Tom Fox's book, Speaking Up is Awesome. This is quickly becoming one of Tom Fox's bestsellers. Great kids book if you haven't picked this up yet. Money well spent. Really fun to show your kids both what you do and also help teach them how to speak up. You got to teach your kids to speak up early and often. Adam Balfour's book, this should be required reading in your household or at least on your team. So this book, Ethics and Compliance for Humans, is part of the Ethico library, and this book is phenomenal as well. If you have not subscribed to the Ethisphere Culture Corner, I'm going to leave this up for a second. Take your phone and hit this QR code and sign up for it. Ethisphere puts out a ton of phenomenal thought leadership. I read everything that they put out because they're such kind of forward thinkers, forward-thinking thought leaders in our space, and they have a really great newsletter. So if you click this link, you can sign up for the Ethisphere newsletter. It will not clutter your inbox. Every word you read, I guarantee, Erica, and I'm guaranteeing this on behalf of Erica, so if you have a problem with my guarantee, I'll share her email address, but every word is really thoughtful. All the thought leadership they put out is really going to help you elevate your program to that next level. So follow Ethisphere everywhere, and if nothing else, subscribe to their newsletter. Okay, next week we have a great episode with Nadine Cherry. She is a corporate coach, and it's all about it's called Permission to Pause. It's about mindfulness tips for ethics and compliance in HR professionals. So invite those friends, get that free book, and let's pack the house next week. So with that, I want to introduce to you Erica Salmon Byrne. She is the Chief Strategy Officer and Executive Chair for Ethisphere. Ethisphere, puts out the world's most ethical companies every year. They put out a number of different thought leadership pieces, white papers, things like that. And they're also the producer of the Ethical Premium, which is up to about 25%. So, the thing I love about the Ethical Premium is it's an objective proof that ethical companies outperform their counterparts year after year in any market condition. So, the cultures that we're trying to build, the cultures of integrity, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, those cultures end up translating into better business results. And Ethisphere is a real catalyst for that conversation. So Erica, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nick, for having me. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to today's conversation.
So today, what we're talking about is activating middle managers, using proxy forms and really doubling down on that middle, that mood. We spend all this time talking about tone at the top, but the mood at the middle is where the real game is. So Erica, why don't we kind of start by framing out what the problem is and what the situation is that you're seeing with your clients and with the data that you guys analyze?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Nick, and this piece of our conversation was something that grew out of that great episode that I did with you a couple of weeks ago. And you and I got into a conversation about this sort of the criticality of thinking of your managers as a channel. And in particular, the thing I would like to, if I could, beat out of the compliance lexicon is mood at the middle. Because you know what? The fact of the matter is, everybody's somebody's top, right? We're so into tone at the top. We think it means the senior leadership team. But at the end of the day, every single person inside your organization has the responsibility to be a leader for the people who report to them. And so they are as high as it goes in some cases for a lot of those folks. And we see this repeatedly in our data. So Ethisphere has been working on helping companies measure ethical cultures since 2016. And we're currently playing with a data set that is about 3 million current employee responses. So really big N, very confident that this statistic that I'm going to give you guys holds kind of across organizations of all sizes. And it's this: for every one employee that raises a concern through your hotline, 3 of them have gone to their HR business partner, and 6 of them have gone to their managers. Now that is self-reported employee data for the 50-ish% of employees in our data set who said that they said something when they saw something. So here's the way to think about this data flow. First question is, did you see something? And our statistics are very much in line with the ECI statistic that you've got on the slide here, Nick. Just half of them said something. Just half of them, right? So you've lost 50% of the people who saw something, who are not comfortable for one reason or another, we can get into those, in actually raising their hand and saying, hey, here's what I saw. Of that half of your employee base who saw something and said something, they are 6 times globally more likely to have gone to their manager than to have called the hotline. So if your case management data does not reflect a 6-to-1 ratio, you're missing a bunch of what has happened across your organization. And your challenge as the compliance team is to figure out why and where. Now, I'll give you some regional breakdowns. For those of you on the line who are operating extensively in the European Union, your relevant statistic is 1 to 6 to 22. So for every one employee that called the hotline in the EU, 22 of them went to their manager. And there's a lot of cultural reasons for that. And, people are very uncomfortable raising their hand on the continent in particular. Asia is 14-1. LATAM is 4-1. So, you're more likely to see the hotline being used in Central and Latin America than you are in Europe or Asia. But regardless, when you look at the global numbers, you are absolutely 100% needing to lean into your managers as the channel. And this makes sense, right? Think about it from the employee's perspective. If I see something, particularly if it's something that concerns me, right? It's not a clear-cut case. It's not a one and done. It's not, something that I know exactly how to handle. If it's fraud, if it's a conflict of interest, if it's a corruption issue, a kickback request from a vendor, who am I likely to go to talk that issue through with? Well, it's the same person I go to for a client concern, right? It's the same person I go to talk about, what my goals are for the next 6 months. It's my manager, right? Your managers are set up to be people leaders, and they're accordingly, they are people channels. But if you have not done the work on the flip side to say, we're here, we're ready to help, here's how to do it, here's how to reach us, you're going to, without question, miss a giant chunk of what's happening across your organization.
Well, and then think of the conclusions that are drawn from that tiny sliver of what's going on in the organization. You have, this is what we're talking about all the time. There's orders of magnitude more reports happening in your organization than are coming through the hotline.
Yep.
So, if you look at the status quo numbers, that's about 1.5 reports per 100. Ours is a little bit closer to 3 reports per 100. Any way you cut it, compare that 1 to 3 reports per 100 to the 65% or 50% in the Ethisphere data of people that have witnessed some kind of misconduct throughout the year. I mean, that is a ton of that is a ton of reports. And then you also boil that down to, there's a ton of people that are speaking up, to Erica's point, to their direct managers within the organization. And if you don't have a way to ring fence that, to activate those middle managers and aggregate those incidents that are being reported to them into a central location, then any conclusions you're drawing from the relatively limited data set of what is going on in your organization could prove to be faulty.
Yep, absolutely, without question. And Nick, I'd like to lean in on that point just for a second, because I want you all to think through the way in which that reporting information is used today. It goes in every board deck. Right? It goes in every board deck. You are presenting to your directors on what your case management statistics tell you, what's happening across your organization. If you know that there's a big chunk of people who are not confident in raising their hand in the first place, and then on top of that, you also know that they're going to channels you may not be capturing, then you have to caveat every piece of that data, right? And it really is about figuring out, where are the places I'm not hearing from, right? What are the channels that people are going to? How do they feel about that process? One of the questions that we ask in the culture work that we do is, for those employees who said, yes, I said something, we said, how did you feel about the process? And more often than not, this varies a lot by company depending on how prepared the managers are, but more often than not, there's a subset of people who reported a concern to their manager and were dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with how that process had gone. And the most commonly cited reason as to why was nothing happened, right? Nothing happened. I didn't see anything happen. Nobody came to talk to me. There was no change. Now, that could be because there actually was somebody did look into the issue and decided not to pursue an inquiry. But more often than not, it's going to be because the manager didn't know what to do, right? The manager didn't know what to do. And so they took this information. They were like, whatever. Here comes Nick complaining again, and I'm just going to put it in the back of my mind, and I'm not going to do anything with it. That is so phenomenally corrosive to your culture, because not to keep picking on you, Nick, but I don't have names of anybody else that's with us. Like if Nick comes to me and my attitude of it is, what now, right? Well, the next time that one of your coworkers says to you, hey, should I raise, I've got this issue, I've got this question, I've got this concern, your reaction is absolutely going to be, oh God, don't bother, right? Don't bother, right? Because they're not serious. They don't really mean it. They don't actually want you to raise a concern, because this was my lived experience.
And that disconnect, to your point, is such a headwind for the ethical culture that many of us are trying to create. If you think about the employee, when they make that report, they're not drawing a distinction between This is something the ethics and compliance team handles. This is something that the organization at large handles. This is something that my manager handles. They are in good faith reporting that to the monolith in their mind that is the organization. And if there is a different employee experience or a different, client experience, so to speak, depending on which of those channels are utilized, the corrosive element can be entered, is easy to get entered into the conversation, in the hallway, in the break room, as one employee, speaks to another and says, it's not even worth it. Don't even waste your time. Right. So, just keeping that in mind, oops, what did I do here? Keeping that in mind is kind of critical because, we all have programs at this point. Anybody who's on the Ethicsverse right now is doing this kind of thing, right? You have something, you have something in place. And so what we're going to be talking about today is not only this problem, but how do we solve this problem? How do we make some small tweaks to what we have in place to really start gaining, more of this, of these reports that exist within our organization that we're not really privy to, that we don't have eyes on, and thus we can't analyze and see the broader picture of the risk profile in the organization. Something that popped out of both the new ECI State of the Global Workplace report that just came out and yours, Erica, is this thing about wrongdoing. So we touched on it a little bit before, but it seems like there's more wrongdoing in our organizations than ever. And we also see a workforce that is less trusting of leadership than ever. Do you see that same thing? And what do you think is at the root of that?
Yeah, we definitely see the same thing. And so, Nick, we talked about this a lot in the report that we issued in January, because one of the things that we did in that particular report is we cut the data by demographic criteria by age. So we looked at the reporting tendencies and feelings about process and faith in the company and managers' commitment to non-retaliation. We looked at all of that across, the boomers, us poor Gen Xers, the millennials, and then the new folks that are coming into the workforce today. And the youngest workers are the most likely to be able to name certain kinds of misconduct, right? So they were very willing to say, this is what I saw. And they were the least likely to report. So as we think about what it's going to look like to have more and more of these recent college grads coming into our workforces, their faith in the systems is rock bottom, right? Absolutely rock bottom. They have very little trust in the systems that are set up. They have very little trust in the process. The good news is many of them are not actively negative on any of it, right? They're neutral. And so they're waiting to be educated on why they should have faith in their manager. They're waiting to be told how the investigation process works. And they're very, very, very willing to name misconduct, right? So this is the post 9/11 generation. This is the see something, say something kids. They've got upstander, bystander language. Like, they have the tools to be able to say, what I'm seeing here is not right. What they don't have is the willingness and the comfort to use the channels available to them to raise their hand. And so we are going to wind up seeing external reports. So if you look at the Edelman data that came out a couple of weeks ago, when Edelman updated their report on trust in the workplace, you see exactly this phenomenon, which is the youngest generation of workers today is the most likely to be willing to go outside the organization in order to raise a concern. They're going to go to TikTok. They're going to use the channels that are available to them, that they have faith and confidence in, as opposed to the internal channels. And that sets you up for a really interesting situation because, as we all know, the DOJ is hammering on voluntary self-disclosure. Well, you can't self-disclose what you don't know. Right. And so you've got to figure out, how can I engender faith in my process by making my process as transparent as possible? That's what they want. They want to understand how it works. And if you don't put the time and the energy into telling them how it works, you are going to lose that audience.
Well, and you said something I think that was pretty important. They're going to go to these other channels that they trust, and they trust that they're going to be at least heard there. They're at least going to be seen there. And that's a big opportunity for us, because I don't think people are going to run to that first necessarily, but they will run to that by default if they don't, to your point, trust the program that they have in place, and they don't trust those channels. Something else I thought was interesting in your report, Erica, was that it seems like across generations, the belief that nothing is actually going to be done, or whatever is done won't be done in a fair way, is a big driver for why people don't speak up. Yeah. It's less of the self-preservation of, I don't want to get retaliated against. Obviously, that's still like a very high one on the list, arguably, the first. But this thing of, whatever's done is not going to be done fairly. That's an apathy thing. That's not a self-preservation thing. And that difference, I think, is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. And it's been something we've been seeing over the course of the last couple of years, is basically at this point, nothing would happen anyway, so why should I bother, is tied with fear of retaliation, in terms of the reason that people cite for not having chosen to say something. So again, to do the math for everybody, you've got that population that has seen something, you've got that 50% of folks who don't say something. And then we ask, for that 50%, the follow-up question we ask in the survey work that we do is, why not? Right? Like, what stopped you from speaking up? And the two reasons, and they're tied across the data set, are, well, why should I bother? Because nothing's going to happen. Or I'm afraid that something bad will happen to me. And that nothing's going to happen piece, I think, is really driven by two factors. The first is, we've done such a good job as compliance professionals over the course of the last 2 decades of emphasizing the termination part of up to and including. When anybody who's actually worked inside of an investigation knows that you fire a fraction of people who are involved in misconduct. Like, there's all kinds of things that you try disciplinary wise before you get to that point. You try coaching, you try training, you have a bonus impact, right? There's lots and lots of things that could happen before you get to that point. But the only thing people see is somebody getting frog marched out the front door with their things in a box. And so if you haven't taken the time to educate your employee base on what's in the up to and including, then they're going to think if so-and-so doesn't get fired, that nothing happened. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is the black box of investigations. We have got to get ourselves comfortable lightening that up. Obviously, there's confidentiality involved. Obviously, you have to take care of the people who are inside that process. But it is not a state secret what kind of volume you do, right? It is not a state secret the number of days it takes you to close an investigation. It is not a state secret the types of people you typically talk to, or the types of discipline, right? So increasingly, we are seeing companies do these really, really great infographics and reports and things, sharing the process with employees in a way that makes them comfortable if they ever had to be a part of it. And for those of you on the line who haven't done that, please put it on your work plan for 2024, because it will be transformational.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that big of a thing. You can simply add a page to your ethics portal with a title that says investigation process, and you put some stats from your case management system, and you put some stats from your investigation process. To Erica's point, give people some expectation for how this process is going to work. How long is it going to take? How long does it typically take you to get back to folks? What are a list of things, of changes that have come from people speaking up, whether those are ideas, whether those are violations, whether those are new policies that have been put into place. There's a way that you can show your work and prove your commitment to, taking these complaints or these issues that are, raised up seriously, that fall short of the state secret, black box that a lot of us have managed our programs with. The more opacity we, wrap around this process, ultimately the less trust folks are going to have, because all human beings have this negativity bias. We have this sort of ethical trauma from other organizations where we've maybe been jaded, where we spoke up when we actually experienced some retaliation, or we saw a friend lose their job from that. Those experiences color how we look at everything. And if you've experienced any level of turnover in your organization over the last 18 to 24 months, odds are there's a high proportion of new folks in your organization that have some of those thoughts. So it's ultimately, kind of to Erica's point, it's on you to activate these ethical refugees and turn them into culture promoters, but that's not going to happen automatically. And you can't just wait for people to just kind of grab these random data points from their experience and say, oh my gosh, this company is actually different. You have to take advantage of this opportunity, and you have to let people know that their voice matters. I mean, think back to what Erica said. People are going on TikTok and they're going on Twitter and they're going on Instagram because they understand that platform and they know that they're at least going to be seen there. If you can prove to folks that you want them to be seen and their voice matters, whether it's coming through the hotline or the web form or to their direct managers, there's a lot of cultural goodness that you're going to be able to gain advantage of very quickly. So, let's talk a little bit, Erica, you've touched on this, prior a little bit, but let's talk about kind of why managers matter and why you think there is this massive, perhaps the biggest bucket of reports in our organization that we really end up not even getting any benefit of.
Yeah. So again, this is self-reported employee data. So these are employees of companies around the globe that have worked with Ethisphere over the course of the last couple of years to respond to this series of questions on the things that matter most to those of you on the line. Do I trust the system? Is are disciplinary decisions fair, or to quote Animal Farm, are some of the animals more equal than others, right? Like, those are the kinds of things that as compliance teams, you guys have to know. And so this is employees saying to us, like, yes, I saw something, I said something, and I went to my manager, right? I followed. And look, this is in every code of conduct. If you have a question, talk to your manager, right? How have we not taken the time to make sure that those managers understand what to do when somebody comes with that question? Right. There was a piece on LinkedIn yesterday that I was reading about the number of managers who got promoted during the pandemic from being individual contributors into being people leaders with zero prep. I mean, zero prep. And so I would challenge all of you on the line today to ask yourselves, how did my organization prepare new managers? What did that process look like? When I got promoted to be a manager, if you are a people leader on the team, what did that process look like? Right? Did I get training on how to approve an expense report and some PTO request and maybe a little bit on the performance evaluation system, and then was sent on my way? If that's the case, you've got unprepared people leaders. And even if you did a situation, or even if you did a training rather, with them about how they support and can help the ethics program, remember that adult learning research tells us if you are someone who, I just got distracted by the Q&A. Thank you. I love Animal Farm. It's one of my favorite books. So so if you are a person who is provided information as an adult learner, this is what the adult learning research tells us. If you can't use that information inside of 6 weeks, it's gone.
Yep.
It's gone. So if you did a training at the beginning of the year with your new managers, guess what? It's October. The chances are that most of those people do not remember most of what you told them. So it is incumbent upon you as a compliance team to be giving them little touch points throughout the year to say, hey, we're here. We're a resource. Don't do this on your own, right? We have seen companies doing great work with approachability self-assessments, right? As a manager, do my people come to me with problems when they're fixable? Or do my people come to me with problems once they're disasters? That spectrum tells you something important about the level to which you are supporting a speak up culture inside your organization. So if you've got a whole bunch of managers who are just getting brought disasters, not compliance disasters, but like product disasters, client disasters, other kinds of disasters, right? That means your people are afraid to tell you they've made a mistake until it's almost too late.
Right.
And how do you coach your managers to create an environment where people are willing to come early and say, I need help, right? I need some support. I'm not sure what to do. How do I, where do I go from here? If you've got a manager who is involved in an investigation, don't assume they remember anything you told them in that initial training about how that process is going to work. You've got to coach them through it, right? Here's what we expect of you. Here's what we don't expect of you. This isn't on you to look into, right? Tom Fox and I, when I was on his podcast a couple of months ago, talked about my favorite phrasing, which is information is a gift. So many managers don't think of information as a gift, right? They think of information as something that they got to do something with, and they cringe, right? We've all worked with the perpetual complainer. We've all worked with the person for whom water is never going to be wet enough. The fact of the matter is how do you set aside that reaction and think about what that employee is telling you as a gift? Because obviously preparing managers as channels is one piece of this puzzle. Making sure employees are comfortable using those managers is another.
I think when we talk about this, I think it resonates with most folks because they know that, they're most likely probably themselves to go to a manager with an issue versus, calling an anonymous hotline.
Absolutely.
They like the idea of activating these middle managers, but depending on what that activation costs in terms of time, in terms of training, it can start to look like this overwhelming project. How do we get these managers activated? I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Or how can a well-intending ethics and compliance team who's trying to drive this culture of integrity forward, but maybe doesn't have all the resources they would like or all the tools they would like, how would you recommend that folks start to get access to some of these, again, the biggest bucket of reports that are out there that can be a source of, properly crowdsourced risk intelligence?
Yep. So, Nick, as it often is, my answer to that is people and process. So let's start with the process side of things. Look at how you are enabling your managers to easily and effectively tell you what's going on in the first place, right? So have you made that process as easy as possible? Have you made that process something that people are comfortable using? How many hoops do I have to jump through in order to actually let you know that my employee has raised a concern? Is the proxy reporting form on my case management system something I can even find? Do I understand what happens to it once it has been submitted, right? So that's the process piece. Look at the workflow that you're asking people to use and ask yourself whether it is as intuitive and as manager-centric as possible, right? Because if you're going to be asking them to do something new, you're going to be asking them to do something different, you've got to ask yourself, am I getting in my own way, right? How easy have I made it for people to make the right choice? People side. You have to start with what's in it for the manager, right? You have to, because we are asking so much of our people leaders today. If you start with here's what I need you to do for me, you have lost half your audience, right? You've got to start with a reminder to the manager that a speak up culture does not end at the ethics and compliance program, right? A speak up culture is a speak up culture. A speak up culture is a product idea culture. A speak up culture is a fix problems fast culture. A speak up culture is a culture where people are comfortable raising their voice at work. And if a manager can wrap their brain around that, it all becomes easier because they can see the tangible business benefits for their team from putting the time in to create this kind of culture, right? If you started as like hey, we need you, you guys are a channel and we need
right.
you to, we need you to be listening for ethics concerns, you're not going to get where you need to get. So the first thing is, what's in it for them, and specifically reminding them that the foundation of a speak up culture is a psychologically safe culture. And all the research tells us that psychologically safe cultures are more productive cultures. So you will perform better as a team if you put the time into building this kind of an environment for your people.
So I don't know if a bunch of our clients saw that podcast you were on with Tom Fox, but we're getting just more and more requests about setting up proxy forms for companies. And so what a proxy form is, and again, I'm just talking about these like little tweaks that can have a huge, leveraged impact in the organization in terms of, the amount of risk intelligence that's being crowdsourced and being aggregated into something that can be, properly analyzed and, conclusions can really be drawn from. But a proxy form is basically an additional web page that is solely for managers to report things on behalf of somebody else. So they can preserve depending on how you set it up, you can preserve anonymity in it. You can have different categories for whether it's, an idea, like Erica said, or it's an issue, or it's a problem, or it's a violation, whatever. And she said a really important word, which was make the process really intuitive. You can't train somebody on something in January and expect, to Erica's point, for them in October to be ready to use it off the jump. So making that form really intuitive, even having a link for like a manager's guide for how that process should go, how that conversation should go, a little guide for, how the process is going to work once they pass something over, maybe even a little reminder about what's in it for them. Major bullet points.
Yep.
And just having like an easy link that folks can access and start dropping reports into or dropping incidents into is really a way to open up some floodgates. And if you've built your workflows right, this doesn't necessarily have to result in a bunch of extra work for your team, but it should result in a bunch more actionable data for you to analyze and gain insights from. If you were setting up a proxy form program, if you're starting from scratch, let's say it's somebody who they have a hotline in place right now, they like everything that you're saying, Erica, how would you kind of attack rolling something out kind of as an MVP, a minimum viable product, so it doesn't turn into this massive project that, takes, $2 million in 2 years to start getting the benefit of?
Yeah, it really can be. It can be very simple, right? So as Nick just laid out, this can be a very simple web form, and the real challenge for you all when you think of from a rollout perspective is how do I explain to people how this is going to work, right? So it's about the comms as much as it is about anything else. It's about the ways in which you roll out this new way of letting people know what's going on. Of people letting you know rather what's going on across the organization. So think about how do I very simply communicate what this is intended for? How do I very simply communicate the ways in which we are going to utilize some of these pieces? How do I simply communicate expectations for managers, right? Because what you don't want to do is roll out this new form and say like, hey, you are absolutely going to be a channel and we're trying to make it as easy as possible for you to tell us what's going on. You have managers out there whose brain freezes when an employee comes to them with a problem, right? And so before you even get to the proxy form piece, really helping people understand what to do and the resources that are available to them, right? So this is a opportunity for you to say, you are not alone in any of this, right? You are not alone in any of this. We are a smart, talented team of ethics and compliance professionals that are here to help you, and here's how we can help, right? Maybe have a story or two of a way in which you've made a process or a policy better as a result of somebody coming forward, like a tangible way in which you have improved people's work experiences. All of those things are going to be really critical to the process. But it's really important, and this goes to one of the questions, Nick, that we had come in via the chat function, and thank you to everyone who sent questions in, which is, the managers being afraid to go to their manager or to raise an issue that an employee has brought to them. Helping managers understand what is expected of them in the moment is a really big piece of this puzzle. And so think about a leave behind, think about a toolkit, think about a decision tree, right? Your employee comes to you with problem X. Here are your options. You can go talk to your own manager. You can put it into a proxy form. You can email the compliance team, right? Really making it very easy for managers to understand the various paths they can follow, the places where it is something where they can try to handle it themselves, which in most cases we don't want them doing. But this idea that managers feel empowered and prepared and well resourced when something comes in, that's really a key piece of it. And a great question that came in, why have a separate form when the hotline form may not be materially different? That's fine. You can use the same form. What you want on the backside is you want the ability to track how it came in. So the advantage of proxy reporting is it tags it as a proxy report, as opposed to a manager filling in the form. And maybe there's text on the form that tells you it's a proxy report, but is that going to be something you can easily roll up to say, these came in via managers, this came in direct from employees? Because having that delta of the modality through which it came in is a really important piece of the puzzle. And it's, as you guys all know well, it's in the DOJ guidance, right? As we have seen the Department of Justice update guidance on what a good compliance program looks like, a piece of it is making sure you understand where your information is coming into you from. And if you're just using one form, even if you have it in the text on that form, that means you have to manually review every form submission to see which ones are proxies. And so form can be the same, just make sure on the back end you're able to tag it so that you know which way it's coming in.
And I think if you think through it, there's probably some additional metadata that you'd want on your proxy form that's not going to be on your basic all-purpose web form that all employee stakeholders can access. Those might be things, again, those might be things about the process. Those might be some metadata tied to how this came to them, and so forth. And another benefit of the proxy form is you're absolutely going to be capturing that manager on that submission. So you can start to not only see, well, which managers are actually using this form a lot, i.e. which of these managers have created a localized speak up culture that is of a higher quality than others. There's a lot of like cross-pollination that can come from that. There's a lot of gamification that can come from that in managers' annual reviews, the extent to which they're utilizing this form. Like, there are issues coming to every single middle manager. So in theory, if you have a proxy form in place with, basic training, lined up, and this has been rolled out, you in theory should see, at least a report from everybody if 65% of people are seeing some kind of wrongdoing in the organization. But again, we have to get out of this goalie syndrome thing where we as ethics and compliance folks are getting, none of the credit for all the block shots and all the blame for things that are getting past us, and really start to actualize these human sensors in our organization and start living up to this picture that's in all the DOJ guidance of an effective program where, to Erica's point, where things are coming from. It's feeding itself. It's providing risk intelligence that we can actually take action on. I mean, it is, I get so kind of, excited about this proxy form thing or this middle manager thing, because if our goal is to build cultures of integrity, and if those cultures are just the sum total of the behaviors, beliefs, experiences of the people in our organization, and if those behaviors, beliefs, and experiences are most influenced by those middle managers, well, then we have to activate those middle managers and bring them into the risk management apparatus that we're trying to build and we're trying to maintain. So again, small tweaks to our program are what is going to really allow us to, magnify our impact beyond what we've been able to, experience, over the last 10 years.
Yeah. Nick, there's a really great conversation going on in the chat right now about retaliation, and particularly
I'm glad.
The environment around retaliation, concerns around retaliation. What do you do if you have, people in your organization whose knee-jerk reaction is to retaliate? How do you actually protect anonymity? And this is a critically important point. So I want to pause and kind of weigh in on this piece of things.
Yeah, maybe start with that story. Your story of your fastest investigation ever, because I think that's a great frame for this part of the conversation, which might be the most important part of this entire webinar. Yeah.
So the story Nick is referring to is from a couple of months ago. I was on the phone with a compliance officer of a good-sized organization, kind of Fortune 1000 sized organization, and I said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I just closed my fastest investigation in the history of my career." And I said, "Well, tell me more." And she said, "Well, I had an employee call me. They had raised a concern a couple of weeks ago. And I was we're in the middle of the investigation. And so I had followed best practice when the issue came in. I, reached out to the reporter. This was somebody who was comfortable telling me who they were. We had a conversation. I kind of laid out for her what the process was going to look like. And I said, I'll check in with you periodically to see how you're doing. But if anything comes up that is of a concern to you, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to me again." So she had taken the time to build that interaction, that relationship with the person who had raised the concern. They're going through the investigations process. The employee calls her back and says, I'm really nervous to raise this, but I feel like my manager is retaliating against me. And so the compliance officer was obviously very concerned, took it down, to spend some time talking to this particular employee, and then opened an investigation into this retaliation concern and called the manager. And the manager said, "Well, I can't imagine how I've retaliated against that person. I haven't spoken to them in 3 weeks." And she was like, "What do you mean you haven't spoken to them in 3 weeks? You do daily stand-ups with your team. Like, this is a team of engineers. You talk to them every day, right? Like, what are you talking about?" And the manager said, "Well, I didn't want to talk to them until the investigation was closed because I didn't want to be accused of retaliating against them." And it was a moment for her where she was like, "Oh, crap. This is a well-meaning manager who had been scared of retaliating against this employee, and who decided the best thing they could do was freeze." So this was a hole in her prep for the manager of how to create an environment where this particular manager felt well supported in continuing to engage with this employee who had raised this concern during the course of the investigation. And it is such a hole for so many companies, because we've done such a good job of scaring the pants off of managers about the retaliation risk and talking to them about tangible employment action and all of those kinds of things. And if you don't if you're only explaining to them what not to do, you are going to wind up with situations like this where the manager just freezes, right? You have to explain to them what you want them to do. You have to give them proactive tools to navigate this kind of scary ecosystem that you live in every day. And so that's kind of story number one on the retaliation piece. Story number two, if you look at the EEOC data on retaliation claims, the manager was either involved or would have been able to prevent the alleged retaliation in about 87% of the cases that the EEOC reports out on at this point, because it is stuff like, I got pulled off the good projects. People started looking at me funny. My desk was moved closer to the bathroom. My desk was moved further from the bathroom, right? Like a lot of what employees say they experienced as retaliation is not what we lawyers have been trained to think of as retaliation. Instead, It's stuff that goes wrong in the employee's mind in the work environment, because when they raise a concern, all their antennae go up for something bad to happen. And so if you as a manager are not well prepared to stand in front of that train, then you are going to wind up with problems.
Yeah, well, it's the elephant in the room. You know what I'm saying? This is what I think we were doing a keynote about a month or two ago, my brother and I, and we were talking about this retaliation stat from the last ECI report that said 79% of people who spoke up experienced some kind of retaliation, whether it's direct or indirect. And they raised their hand and they said, yeah, but a lot of that is just kind of perceived retaliation. And, how do you account for that? And I just thought that was like totally the wrong question. I threw them out of the yeah. I didn't want that person even listening to the rest of the talk. Just kidding. But the point is, like, retaliation is in the eye of the beholder. So if somebody has had a retaliation before, or they've heard about this as an experience, or as an experience that others have had in a previous job, in the current job, and you couple that with the negativity bias that every human being has, to Erica's point, you have to get out ahead of it. You have to get out ahead of it and make sure that people don't feel that. So if you're sitting on this webinar and you think you don't have a retaliation problem in your organization, I think you're wrong. I think every organization has a retaliation problem, because the perception of retaliation is going to be there, right? It's in the eye of the beholder. And then you have this dynamic that Erica just talked about. You have the sort of bad retaliation that's coming from someone, not liking that they were told on, and they're, moving somebody closer to the bathroom or further away from the bathroom. And then you have the other potential source of retaliation, which is a well-intending person creating circumstances that allows for the reporter in this case to feel like they're being retaliated against. So, this question that came in the chat, what can be done if a company has that sort of retaliatory attitude? I would, I think the best practice is to have a consistent, coherent anti-retaliation campaign where you're bringing up the elephant in the room and saying, we think we might have a retaliation problem in our organization. This is what we're doing to attack it. We want everybody to be able to speak up to their managers. We have these other kind of anonymous reporting channels in place. Here's how the process looks. Any reports of retaliation are taken extremely seriously. Those are all kind of front end, marketing things you can do to push out a message that hopefully prompts the workforce to get a little bit more comfortable with your commitment to anti-retaliation. But then after an incident occurs, you have to ask yourself, like, well, what are we doing to make sure that person doesn't feel retaliated against? Are we doing exit interviews and we're circling back on instances of retaliation, whether that's with a particular manager or in a particular division? When somebody speaks up, who's identified? Are we circling back with them 30, 60, 90 days after the fact and checking on and seeing if they feel like they've been retaliated against? In our tool, there's a way, and ours, I don't think is the only one who does this, but there's a way to communicate with anonymous reporters through the tool so that anonymity can be preserved. That should be part of the investigation, process, ex post of something being closed. Circle back with that anonymous report. Circle back with reporters, regardless of how they came through, and just show them that you actually care about the potential for this retaliation happening. And I'm just saying, very quickly, within a quarter or two, you're going to start to see some change in the tenor of the workforce with respect to the retaliation fear. Like, nobody wants to be retaliated against, but it's a major reason preventing us from getting this risk intelligence at scale that we can do something about with our words, with a credible campaign, and with a tangible commitment to rooting this type of mindset out of our organization.
Yeah, no, without question. And Nick, you said two things there that I really want to lean in on. One is that follow-up piece, right? If we look at our data, as everybody on the line I think knows, we've been doing the world's most ethical companies process now for 18 years. we have, decades worth of programmatic data as a result of that process that we use for benchmarking all the time. And if we look at a question we've been asking for about 6 years now, which is, what do you do as a company to make sure that people who raise a concern are not experiencing retaliation, right? What are your practices? The options are, we follow up with known reporters, we follow up with known reporters and material witnesses. Great practice, by the way. Don't just stop with your reporters, talk to the people who are part of the investigation too.
Great point.
We vet RIF lists to make sure that somebody is not, experiencing a layoff who raised a concern. We look at promotion metrics. We look at performance evaluation changes. One of my personal favorites, we watch sick day usage, because somebody who was a great performer, who was regularly in the office and regularly engaged, who suddenly changes their pattern, that's a signal to you that you really ought to go and figure out what might be going on there, right? All of those things are things that in the back end on your systems you can be doing to keep an eye on an employee who raises a concern. But even more important than that is the way you talk about retaliation. If you insist on leaning in on just a legal retaliation, you are doing your culture no favors, right? Because perceived retaliation is retaliation, even if you're not exposing yourself to litigation risk. Your general counsel can worry about your litigation risk, right? Your employment counsel can worry about your litigation risk. You as a compliance officer are worried about getting in front of your risks. And for that purpose, whether it's a legal retaliation or not, it's corrosive to your speak up culture. So talking about retaliation as an impact on an employee who has the courage to raise their hand, that's the way you need to talk about it, right? You don't need to talk about what it is under the law. Stop talking about what it is under the law. Talk about what it does to your culture. And that is one of the key things that we need to see more of a shift on, because too many managers are still thinking about retaliation versus perceived retaliation. And we've got to get that out of the lexicon.
Yeah, to your point, there's no difference between those. And again, think back to that stat you shared with us. The biggest category of EEOC claims is retaliation, right? These are all retaliation-based claims for the most part. And then I think you said 87% of those, something could have been done about it. Like if they got out ahead of it. That is, we're not talking about 1 in 10. We're talking about like 8 in 10 or 9 in 10. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Yep. That is a massive proportion that we can do something about. So there's a lot of shots on goal that we can prevent by activating those middle managers, which is kind of like activating our defense, and by showing the people in our organization that we're different from our counterparts because our culture of integrity is authentic, because we're putting actual tangible things in place to give people a voice, to make sure that they're not getting retaliated against, to make sure that they don't even feel like they might be getting retaliated against. I mean, that's the battleground. This distinction between actual and perceived retaliation is so silly. It's really self-serving, and it kind of gives us a massive blind spot for a ton of risk that we could otherwise do a lot about.
Yep, absolutely. And the last point I'll make on this, Nick, especially with Ethics Week coming up, if this isn't part of your dialogue, right, make it a part of your dialogue now. Ethics Week's a great opportunity to talk about how the company thinks about information and how the company thinks about employees raising a concern, right? And happily, most of us are not using whistleblower language anymore, but if you are still using whistleblower language, please move away from that, right? Because one of the things that does is it puts the onus on the employee to decide whether this is something worth blowing the whistle about or not, right? If you phrase it as raising a concern, it can be an undeveloped concern. It can be an emerging concern. It can be a question, right? We, as compliance officers, our nirvana is 5 million employees asking us the question before they do the stupid thing, right? That's where we're trying to get to, is employees who are comfortable saying, I'm not sure what to do. I don't know where to go. I need help. And the better you can prepare all those I need help opportunities and avenues, the better suited you are going to be able to mitigate and manage your inherent risk profile as an organization.
Well, just shifting toward that as being a priority forces the department itself to kind of change how it's branded. And when we can start to change that brand, we can organically be brought into conversation sooner, because it doesn't feel like this massive chasm we have to leap across in order to raise, to blow the whistle on a known issue. We can be brought into things earlier. And to Erica's point, our job is to be as proactive as possible. by our nature, our job is going to be somewhat reactionary, reacting to fires, reacting to changing regulations, changing business conditions, and so forth. But the larger the proportion of our time that can be spent on proactive things, which are an indication that we're getting brought into things sooner, that we're viewed as the circulatory system of the organization, providing guidance for folks, the better off we're going to be, not just from a risk mitigation perspective, but from that sort of trusted advisor, panacea that we're all driving toward.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the tricks that I like, Nick, that I'll share with your audience as they're thinking about what their Ethics Week activities could potentially look like on this topic is asking your managers to think about what their failure response is. So there's been some great research on what failure response does to a culture. So it's a spectrum, right? If your managers are on the problems come to me early, we figure out what went wrong, we talk about how we're going to fix it, we work as a team, that's a healthy, psychologically safe speak up culture where people are going to be comfortable raising their hand and bringing questions forward. If it's who screwed up, one throat to choke, whose fault is this, and everything that is brought to you is a disaster, that is a culture where things are going to get swept under the rug. People are going to try to cover things up, and you are not going to be hearing from those parts of the business, right? So asking your managers to think a little bit about kind of where they fall on that spectrum, thinking about what tools you can work with HR to give them to move them towards the let's solve the problem together end of the spectrum. And then, really helping managers understand that everything that is brought to them is not theirs alone to handle, right? That there is an infrastructure that has been built under them that is available to assist them in navigating waters that they might be uncomfortable in. All of those things are things that we can do as compliance teams that will better equip our managers to lead the way we need them to lead.
Well, and I think to your point, if we do that right, it's going to drive a lot of influence in our organization. The best way to drive any influence is by adding value. And for this particular topic, this is a real stressor for a lot of managers. They don't know what to do. Are they going to fight? Are they going to flight? Or are they going to freeze? Right? Those are kind of the main three responses. And if we can be there as a beacon in the darkness for them, a lighthouse in this, in the management storm that they're navigating through, we can really add a lot of value for them. We can really de-stress what could otherwise be a really difficult situation. And again, position ourselves ostensibly as that sort of trusted advisor for more of these managers. But there's this whole group of folks in our organization that I think, and this is why Erica and I got so excited about this topic. There's this whole group of folks that if we activate them right, it'll push our program forward by leaps and bounds. But if we don't activate them, we're going to be, kind of trying to bail water out of our boat with like a little spoon. So when we're talking about how to activate managers, let's walk through these kind of largest, our major sort of takeaways on how to start activating our managers. You talked about this one earlier, and I think we put it first on the list because I think it's really important, but understand that this is a big request. What do we mean by that? And how do we make this less of a big request?
Yeah, so understanding that this is a big request is the first. So a lot of managers think that this is not part of their job description. This is somebody else's job, right? This is their manager's job. This is the ethics and compliance team's job. This is HR's job, right? We see this all the time. Managers not really thinking about themselves as the people who are modeling what success looks like for the people who report to them. This is what I meant when I said everybody is somebody's top, right? Like you are the person that is modeling for the people who report to you what success looks like at your organization. And accordingly, like this is the set of expectations that we have for you as a manager. But having some empathy, right? Having some empathy for managers, because there are a lot of things that we've put on managers' plates. And we may or may not have been giving them the right support. And that really goes into, okay, what are the supports? What kind of scaffolding can I build for these managers to make it possible for them to take on this particular thing I'm asking them to do? So what are your leave behinds? What are your toolkits? What are your ongoing touch points? Don't make this one and done, right? Don't make this one and done because you're not going to be as successful as you think you could be. Think of this as ongoing manager engagement. Build it into your planning process accordingly and make sure you have various points in the year where you're coming to them with different kinds of resources and checking in. One thing we didn't put on this slide, Nick, that we should have, celebrate successes, right?
Great.
Please, when you do your storytelling, do not just talk about the things that went wrong, right? Talk about the things that went right. Talk about the risk that was averted. Talk about the process that was improved. Talk about the manager who came to you and said, guys, I've been reading this gifts and entertainment policy 6 times. I have no idea what it says, right? The people who force you to rethink about the way in which you're talking to employees, celebrate those people, right? Because as one of the things we like to say here at Ethisphere is the 4 levers you can pull on to influence your culture are who you hire, who you fire, who you praise, and who you promote. So ask yourself at every point in that 4-prong lever analysis, how am I empowering managers and celebrating the right people and the right behaviors as part of this?
Who you hire, who you fire, who you praise, who you promote.
Yep.
That's great. Yeah, those are great buckets to look under. Because, I'm sure one of those are typically not, there's not enough data under one of those buckets, like who we praise for being a cultural upstander or somebody who's speaking up. We got a great comment, that a whistleblower is like a lighthouse which delivers transparency on what's really happening within the organization. That's exactly true. And everybody actually wants to care. I mean, if you think back on your first job, you were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. You probably had a new little briefcase. You had your new work clothes. You were so excited to go to work. And at some point, that excitement kind of fades and you start to almost feel stupid, especially when you work in an organization that's toxic or that doesn't really walk its talk. You start to kind of feel stupid for even having the hope that business could be different. We have to reactivate that hope and we have to get that back out of people because we all have that and we're all wired that way at our core. So let's talk a little bit about leveraging training in communications and we'll wrap up with the proxy forms point.
Perfect. Yeah. So look at the way managers are being prepared across your organization right now. Yes, in many cases, we see companies, particularly larger companies, doing separate standalone training for managers on sort of how to lead ethically, how to think about their role as managers. But you can insert these kinds of topics in somebody else's training, right? It doesn't have to be an additional layer. So be flexible, be creative in the way in which you get this message out to managers, and don't think of it just as training. Think of it as ongoing engagement, right? Communications count. Showing up at a team meeting counts. 5 minutes at a manager retreat counts. Sending out a toolkit counts. All of those things are part of your process of actively engaging with your employees. And think about what you're covering there, right? So manager's role as an ethical leader, how to talk about ethics and compliance issues with your employees, expectations for when you come across an issue, process you want the manager to follow, what you don't want the manager doing in those circumstances, right? All of those kinds of things. And make sure that you're talking to them about what retaliation looks like from the employee's perspective. Right? Not just from the company's perspective, from the employee's perspective. Tell stories if you have them. Tell somebody else's stories if you don't. You can borrow the compliance officer story that I told because it's a great example of a well-meaning manager that just made the wrong choice. So we are hardwired to learn via stories. In all likelihood,
yep.
That may be the only thing you take away from this webinar is the memory of that particular story because that's the way our brains work. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, you have to take advantage of those and, even just giving them some guidance to say, hey, I appreciate you sharing this with me. I don't ever want you to feel retaliated against. We have a big push against retaliation right now. If anything comes up, after us having this conversation that even feels like retaliation, I want you to come and tell me that again. But activating those middle managers to echo that message, to live that message out and provide some tangible interaction points that prove that message in the real world can do a lot because that's what this game of influence is really about. We have to change people's minds by changing their hearts. And then the last point here, how to activate those middle managers is to leverage proxy forms. Again, this is a very simple thing. Spin up another form, send a link around to your managers, make that form extremely intuitive, perhaps with branching logic or dynamic questions that make it kind of, paint by numbers or really plug and play for that manager to get you, the ethics and compliance or the risk management team, the information you need in order to do something about it. So I know we ran long. Erica, as always, absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining us today. Definitely subscribe to the Ethisphere newsletter, the Culture Corner. It's phenomenal. Round of applause for Erica. For those of you who stayed back, yes. Thank you so much, Erica. A lot of fun. Hope you have a great trip. You're going to have to send some pictures if you can sneak a phone in. Erica's going to U2, the U2 concert in Vegas, and she's going to do it inside that big sphere. So that's going to be a phenomenal thing. Send us some pics for sure, Erica. And I hope you all join us next week for Ethicsverse Day, we're going to be doing a mindfulness session on how we can build more mindfulness into our teams and how we can de-stress ourselves so we can do the magical work that we do every day. See you guys next time.
All right. Thanks so much.